So we'll do Surely the Presence.
Join our hands and spirits together to feel the presence. Surely the presence is here with us. Thank you. It's a sure hope.
Who shall condemn to endless flames the chosen people of our God? Since in the book of life their names are fairly written, Jesus' blood is for the sins of his elect. Complete atonement he hath made, his justice fused without defect. The work he wrought, the price he paid, nor tribulation, nakedness, the famine, peril, or the sword, nor persecution or distress can separate from Christ the Lord. His sovereign mercy knows no end, his faithfulness shall still endure. For those who on his truth depends shall find his word forever sure. No tribulation, nakedness, the famine, peril, or the sword, not persecution or distress can separate from Christ the Lord. Nor life, nor death, nor depth, nor height, nor powers below, nor powers above, not present things, nor things to come, can change his sovereign plans, can stay what he commands, can change his sovereign plans of love. We have a sure hope, we have a sure hope. Nothing can separate us from his love. We have a sure hope, we have a sure hope. Nothing can separate us from his love. We have a sure hope, we have a sure hope. Nothing can separate us from his love. We have a sure hope, we have a sure hope. Nothing can separate us from his love. Nothing can separate us from his love.
Thank you, Barbara. Barbara Whitney, our music director for years in the choir. Thank you. I'd just like to welcome everyone to Unity of the Seacoast, where two or more are gathered. We always see a crowd. And I especially want to welcome those of you who are listening in. Excuse me. And we ask you to please silence your cell phones. Thank you. And we'll start off, as we always have for many, many years, with the daily word. Refresh. Honoring the divine presence within, I am refreshed. Stretching and yawning after a good sleep, enjoying a brisk walk in the early morning, or sipping a replenishing drink after a workout or time in the sun, I feel refreshed. I move forward into my next activity with a renewed feeling of well-being. Building upon and refreshing my knowledge may relieve me from thinking too much about my obligations. Spending time with a good book or revisiting favorite passages from my favorite writing can give me a relaxing mental pause. I find many opportunities to refresh my awareness that God, the divine presence, is within me wherever I am and whatever I am doing. It only takes a moment to find God's presence reflected in the people and animals I encounter and the natural beauty that surrounds me. And from chapter 15, verse 32, Romans, so that by God's will I may come to you with joy and be refreshed in your company. And again, the affirmation, honoring the divine presence within, I am refreshed. We also share our mission statement. If you have it there, please join me. It's up on the screen. Our mission statement is, we are a loving, nurturing community dedicated to being a positive path to spiritual living, to awaken oneness with God within us all. And every Monday, the first Monday of every month at 7 p.m., our own Charlie has a meditation. Please join him. We also have been broadcasting. We've also been broadcasting live to YouTube on our YouTube channel. Just type in Unity of the Seacoast in the YouTube search button. I used to pray real hard for a long time on that one. But even easier, you just go to the webpage at unityoftheseacoast.org and scroll down until you see the links to bring you to our live services or even past events. All our talks are archived there if there's something you want to look back and reflect on. And also, on this page, our donate button is there. If you're called to tithe or donate, it is a blue button called Tithely. And you just click on it and you can either tithe weekly or monthly or whatever you choose to do. And also, if you prefer to mail your donation, our mailing address is Unity of the Seacoast, McConnell Center, Suite 246, 61 Locust Street, and that's Dover, New Hampshire, 03820. And there's lots of announcements, lots of activities going on at Unity of the Seacoast. Don't forget to check out our meetup group for all our events. You can also access this on our webpage as well. Join us for our poetry group, Poets in Unity. We want to thank Shane Moran for hosting this. It's the third Saturday of each month, and this will resume again in September. And also, there's a game night now, the third Friday of each month at 6 p.m. Game night is a time to get together. All are welcome to attend. You do not have to be a member of Unity. Come and have a fun night of playing cards or board games. We have some board games, and you're welcome to bring one to share with us. And also, A Course of Miracles. I don't see Cynthia today, but A Course of Miracles will be offered at Unity of the Seacoast beginning on September 14th at 10 a.m. Everyone is welcome. The classes will be held each week at this time. That's 10 a.m. on Thursday. We will have some textbooks to loan, and look forward to meeting all who wish to participate. So if you have any interest, please join us. And for information, you may call 207-216-3438. And next week, our dear Tom continues to look at the New Testament by examining Revelation. And also, we've always, many years too, greeted each other with a Sanskrit word called namaste. And meeting the divine in me sees and honors the divine in you, or the Christ in me sees the Christ in you, or simply the best in me sees the best in you. Namaste. Namaste, Barbara. And so it is. Namaste. Okay, at this time, Barbara and the choir will honor us with another song. Thank you.
I am Paul, enslaved on by Jesus Christ, an apostle who set aside to proclaim the good news that was promised long ago concerning him, God's Son who came down to earth to be born and to give new birth, whom we have received the grace to make him known. So I write this to the saints who are in Rome. I thank my God, for your faith is in plain view, and never ceasing to pray for you. I long to return to strengthen you at home, but I've been delayed in order that I may reap of the harvest that includes the Greeks, barbarians, the foolish, the wise. I'm compelled to preach the truth and not support the lies. I'm ready to reap the seeds that are sown, and I'm eager to preach to the saints who are in Rome.
My favorite time, I mean, everything's my favorite time at Unity, but to introduce our speaker and have watched him walk forward no matter what's going on in his life. And as most of us know, that lately he's had a lot going on in his life. And, you know, I happen to have been in a situation like that years ago. And, you know, just so grateful. And it's interesting because I was kind of triggered with that. I got a little angry. And then but right away I started praying for Tom. Nothing to do with me. It just, things can be triggered sometimes when we go through a horrendous experience like that. But anyway, he's still here. Nothing stops him. Or they say with the mailman, rain, snow, wind, it doesn't matter. Walkers, wheelchairs, crutches, you name it. Having to go home a few years ago, but always coming back. And so I just want to give a big, big round of applause to Tom Scheinel.
Thanks, Mom.
So good morning, everyone. There's a lot of stuff going on up here. There. Before I begin, there's a couple things I want to mention. First, there was a gentleman that came in last week during my talk. For those who don't know who he is Mark Hicks. He's the guy that sets up Truth Unity. He is the keeper of all the archives that is Unity. Every article, anything is there. He puts that, and he puts it online at Truth Unity. He's also the guy who started the Fillmore Study Bible. And he asked some wonderful people to participate. Included in there is me. He's offered these books to us for free. He dropped off 6, and he's going to send in 6 more, and as many as we want. So I want to make sure that if you want one, let me know. There's 3 more copies back there. Frank, I told you I would save you one. So that is for you, my friend. And that gives interpretations on a more metaphysical level than traditional Bibles. So we have a Bible that we're hoping we'll use for the next 70 years or so. I hope longer because I want my picture to stay along. And there's a couple other things I want to mention. Every year we have an annual meeting, but because of my health issues, we never seem to get around to it. And we're only a couple months away from our next one. So I'd like to accomplish a couple things before that time. I'd like people to think about, we need to do a rotation for the technical end of this that Casey does every week. So maybe if someone wants to volunteer a week, a month to sit back there and learn it and do it. So that way, if we're not in, it gets taken care of. And the other thing is we need more board members and we need more official members of the church to become a board member. Our board now consists of Tracy, Charlie, and me. And I'm only a board member because it's the fault with the position. But we accomplish a lot, but it would be nice to have a couple more people. So just start rolling that around in your heads, and we'll set up a time at a fellowship to discuss it and go from there. So today's talk is less about the content of the New Testament or the Christian scriptures. It's about Paul's influence and how the book was put together and a little bit of history. Now, there are 27 books that make up the New Testament. And these books were arranged as a canon in the year 367 by a man named Athanasius, who was considered the Pope of Alexandria. At the same time, there was a guy named Origen who was said to put together the same books, but he left out Revelation, so Athanasius gets the credit. But he saw these 27 books as best representing the Christian movement, and he issued a proclamation with his canon, which says, "In these alone is proclaimed the doctrine of godliness. Let no man add to these, neither let him take from these." Now, these weren't the only writings about Jesus at the time, but this proclamation put in motion a very successful attempt to rid the world of these other writings. Because of this, there's probably a great history of Jesus that's been lost. Other books have been discovered, the Gospel of Mary, Judas, Thomas, and such, and a few more. But what was lost was far greater than what we've recovered. And this is a big deal because we may have lost an in-depth history of Jesus, such as what happened to his father, Joseph, what his childhood like was, perhaps more of his personality. Was he more Gnostic or less Gnostic? Was he more metaphysical? And there are probably countless other stories that we've lost because of this. And this is a big deal because it was a successful attempt to control the narrative and the history. And we have to be aware of that because this happens in our society today as well. Now, so the Bible, it took its final shape in the year 367. But that's not when it was written. In fact, the Bible was based on copies of copies. The earliest copies of some of the writings we have date back to around the year 150. So just knowing that, we know that those copies were copies of copies. This was a time when perhaps 10% of the population was literate, and less than that skilled at writing or scribing, as they called it back then. Now, the 27 books, the first 4 depict the ministry of Jesus, except one has the birth, we have the birth story and a brief thing about when he was 12 and he was left in the temple. But it covered a short period of his life, probably 1 to 3 years, up until his death. These books are called the Gospels, and they're also canonical books, which is books that fit together because of the topic. And it's not to be confused with a canon, which is a group of books put together to form one book, which really is what the Bible is, both the New Testament and the Old Testament. And today's talk is what I classify as the nuts and bolts. There's no inspiration here, but it's important to understand the book that we get to talk about, each week. The Bible is based, it's its own class of its book. Our faith is tied up in it. And we study it every week. But though we study it, not many people read it. So we all take what we learn, from different sources. And it's sad because some of the best stories ever written come from this book, not just the New Testament, but the Old Testament. The story of Moses and Cain and Abel, Jacob. 1 Samuel is a great story. It's multi-generational. It has victors and losers. It has loyal friendship. It has underdogs. It has the creation of kings. Some of these stories our holidays are based upon. These stories tell you amazing things about the strength of women. The story of Esther, and even the little blurb about Vashti, Queen Vashti, shows the strength of a woman. And you really have to look closely at these stories to pull that out. But they're wonderful. And the styles vary, especially the styles between the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures. They're distinct, different type of storytelling. And we cover the Gospels so much that I only really want to touch on them. I'm going to focus more on Paul. But because 14 of the 27 books are attributed or mention Paul, the bulk of this New Testament he is contributed to. Now, 3 of the Gospels are called the Synoptic Gospels. The Gospels means good news. Paul also calls his writings Gospels because he considers them good news. And he did this before the Gospels were written. So technically, he owns that right. The Synoptic Gospels are Mark, Matthew, and Luke, because they're very similar and often tell the same stories. Of the Gospels, Mark was written first, perhaps as early as the year 60, then Matthew and Luke. And it's assumed that the authors of Matthew and Luke used Mark as a source. Among other sources, one they suspect is called Quell, which there's no trace of. I'm not quite sure how they decided this, but there was a source that went around that they seemed to use. Also, they believe now that probably Thomas was one of their sources, because the sayings in Thomas match up so well with the sayings of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then we have the Gospel of John, which is a whole different version of Jesus' life. The Gospels cover mostly the missionary life of Jesus and slightly to his death and after. And each author has their own agenda. And some people get offended by hearing that each author has their own agenda, but each author does something to make it worth reading and studying in their own style. And if they didn't have an agenda, everyone would look at the first version and go, no need for another. But we have those 4 books. And then the next book is Acts. which was written by the same person who wrote Luke, and they consider them companion books, like they should be read together. And in Acts, that's where it tells the birth of the Christian movement and how it moves forward. And we're introduced to Paul, the story of his conversion. And it was originally thought it was written about the year 60, but now they seem to think it could be written as late as the year 150. And these dates are important because it shows you the distance between the crucifixion and the authorship of these books. And it makes us wonder the changes and how exact they really are. Now, Paul's a unique person. He has very, very strong ideas. His ideas about the direction of the church, the way people should behave, and he's often at odds with the other disciples. Paul's letters are thought to be among the first that were ever written, the earliest maybe around the year 50, but most certainly before the year 70. The year 70 is an important year in Jewish history as well as biblical history. Rome, to put down a rebellion, destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. This was the epicenter of Jewish life at the time. It was as if they destroyed their connection to God. It's such an impactful event that it was written down so much after that, in almost every story of the New Testament after that, but so many other stories, and records that we find, except for Paul, which makes people believe that if it was that important, Paul would have wrote about it. So they believe his stuff was written before the year 70. Paul had several people that he used as scribes. One was thought to be Barnabas, his first companion, but mostly they think Timothy. And more likely Timothy would write, and then Paul would just write a line or two at the end. And they know that because he would comment about it being his own line. And the timelines, again, are important and interesting because we see the evolution of Christianity through these works. The Gospels were oral stories that made their way around. There are most likely many other stories about Jesus' life at the time, but the one we have here seems to be written no sooner than 50 years after his death. And it's Paul's letters, again, that were written first, perhaps maybe 30 years after Jesus' death. Now, 13 books of the Bible are attributed to Paul, like he wrote the letters. But it's suspected that he did not write them all. Of the 13, most scholars believe that he wrote Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1st Thessalonians, and Philemon. The next group is disputed on whether he wrote it or not. Ephesians, Galatians, 2nd Thessalonians, 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus. And those last three are called pastoral epistles. Paul and the letters attributed to Paul are either called letters or epistles. The difference is the letter is more general in tone, and an epistle is more instructional, has more doctrine, gives instructions how to live your life, how to behave within the church. An epistle can be a letter, but not all letters are epistles. The big difference is, again, the epistle is instructional. 9 of Paul's letters are written to churches and 4 to individuals. Now, Paul was a Jew who followed Jesus. They were not Christians at the time. 1 Thessalonians was believed to be his first writing, at least that we know of. But we know from the letters that Paul, as a Jew, was a Pharisee. And a Pharisee was a group of people who did not follow the Bible literally. They looked for symbolic meanings into it. They were more liberal with the text. In his letters, Paul often interprets the Bible symbolically. He believed in the end times. He believed the Messiah was coming back, a final judgment, and a basic apocalypse. And that Jesus was the Messiah who was coming back for that. In his early life, he considered himself a very good Jew, and he persecuted followers of Jesus. He would do this by getting them expelled from the synagogues or flogging them or worse. And a couple years after Jesus' crucifixion, Paul had a vision of Jesus, and he believed he was set apart by God to spread the word of Jesus to the Gentiles. Paul called himself an apostle with the authority to speak for Jesus. Now, much of what we know about Paul comes from his letters and the book of Acts. The book of Acts, they figure, was probably written years after his death, so it's considered a secondary source. The letters are considered a primary source, but since they come from his own lips, we only get Paul's version of Paul. We get little about anyone else. And then we have the seven general epistles. Those were not written by Paul. Hebrews, James, 1 Peter, 2 Peter, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and Jude. And we're going to save those for a later time. But Paul, in his viewpoint, takes up such a big chunk of the book that it becomes worthy of this conversation. It's Paul's version of following Jesus that won out and shaped the direction of the church. And then there's finally the odd book out, Revelation. It's such a unique book that I will take next week to talk about it. It's one of my favorite books. It's when you sit and read it, it's just some of the best writing in the Bible is in that book. Now, Paul had his own style of writing. He would start out with a greeting, and often he would include people that he felt were important, like Timothy. And the reason he would do this is because the person he included was generally the person he was sending with the letter to the churches. That gave the person credibility as soon as they got there. Now, Paul persecuted those who followed Jesus, as we learned in Acts. And then he had a vision of Jesus on the road to Damascus. In his vision, he sees Jesus coming back from the dead to make him an apostle and a leader. So this perspective becomes important because he sees Jesus is coming back to save him from his sins. And if he did this for Paul, he believes Jesus is doing this for everyone. His visions are so real to him that he's convinced he is the greatest apostle. And he states so in 2 Corinthians. But it's clear through his writing that he's at odds with the other disciples. They had known Jesus while Jesus was alive. Paul had not. And at first I thought about that and it made sense. But when I look at it with open eyes, I don't hold that against Paul. Jesus has been dead for 2,000 years. And I think he speaks to me. Maybe not through visions, but I make a lot of my decisions based on my Christ-like consciousness or nature. If it wasn't for Jesus, I don't know where I would be right now. Paul believes in his vision and the idea that Jesus guides him. And that changes the trajectory of the Christian movement. Was he the greatest disciple or not? I don't know. We have such limited information of the other disciples. But it's clear that Paul's concepts won out, and the victors get to have their stories told. And that victory again was sealed in the year 367 when Athanasius declared it so. Now, Paul's style of writing is very clear in 1 Thessalonians. While Paul was in Athens, he sent Timothy to the city of Thessalonica to check on how the church was doing and to report back to Paul. And Paul wrote to them, and that's where we get 1 Thessalonians. Now, these churches were not churches like we think of today. They were home churches. It was a fledgling Christian movement at the time. And a letter would generally go to one home, be read, and then go to the next one and be read until everyone got it. And after the greeting, Paul gives thanks. He gives thanks for specific behaviors he wants to praise, setting the theme for the letter. Then comes the body of the letter, which he addresses the topic or topics that he wants to talk about. Almost all contain a moral dissertation, warns them of bad behavior, and encourages them to be better people. And then he ends with a closing. Galatians starts out different because he's not happy with the people of Galatia. He writes to a group of churches in Galatia, which is in Asia Minor or present-day Turkey. He thought he wrote this around the year 55. But he's angry at them. And this chapter this book is an important part because it sets up the rift between him and the other apostles. You know, today when we think of followers, we think of Jesus, of Christians in a certain way, but they didn't have that at the time. So Paul had gone to Galatia and set up these churches, and then he left. And while he was in Athens, other people, presumably James and Peter, had gone to Galatia and explained their version of Christianity. And that if you wanted to be a Christian, you had to become a Jew, which meant you had to be circumcised and go through all the procedures. And it was works, belief, faith, and works. Your actions had to match your faith. Paul had a more liberal idea where it was faith alone. And faith alone is what allowed so many Gentiles to become Christians. And that's where that shift began to happen. It's sure a lot easier to believe in faith and do nothing than it is to make your works match your words. The letter Galatians, that's an epistle. It's a very instructional letter to these people. And again, he calls it good news. Paul's idea of following Jesus was, again, not following Jewish law, but by faith. Then he wrote Romans. Romans is considered his masterpiece. St. Augustine of Hippo said a verse from Romans caused him to finally become a baptized Christian. Martin Luther said a single verse inspired the theology that led to the Protestant Reformation. And the theme of Romans is confidence and trust in God. And this letter was unique for Paul because this was sent to churches that he did not set up. He had not met these people. He may have known a few, but it was going to a whole new area. The churches in Rome were set up most likely again by Peter. And they understood mostly what others had preached. Paul is laying the groundwork out for his visit. He's telling them how to believe and how to behave and setting up when he goes. And he's planning on going to Rome and then to Spain. He's telling them that they've all sinned and fallen short, but shall be saved through the redemption of Jesus Christ. And it's this idea that has shaped the church for 2,000 years. His versions or themes have become the standard. And although he never met Jesus in person, his conviction to his visions and his ideas have influenced the way we think of being a Christian. Then the next one that really kind of shaped Paul and tell us about him are the first 2 Corinthians. Paul, besides his message to the church, this letter is laden with his attitude toward the other disciples. And Paul seems to carry this to an extreme. And since we don't have the other versions from the other disciples, we only see it through his letters. And it's quite possible that his anger was well earned. But he's so prolific in his writing that, again, his writings become the words that are mostly in the Bible. And I don't want to break down each letter any more than this. Hopefully at some point people will read these letters. And when you read, you're going to find things that you agree with and disagree with. Some things are just beautifully written, but you're going to realize that Paul is someone you can't shut the book on. His presence looms large. He's a fascinating person when you think he wasn't one of the original 12, or even of the many who followed Jesus during his life. Yet he's the second most influential person in Christian theology. He believes in the apocalypse, so much so that the book Revelation becomes part of the book of the Bible, and everyone believes in the apocalypse. In his life, he was arrested in Jerusalem. He was flogged, kept in prison for 2 years. He was tormented and praised for his views. He took on a mission that if he hadn't taken on, his life would have been a lot easier. That alone warrants some kind of respect. And Paul does get to Rome, and there's little influence there until his death. And there are several timelines and stories about his death, but most believe Nero had him beheaded. Nero was persecuting the followers of Jesus and putting them to death. It's believed that at the same time Paul was put to death, Peter was crucified at the suggestion of Nero. The reason Paul was not crucified was because he was a Roman citizen. So they wanted to give him a more humane death. There's so much in these stories and these letters that it's worth taking the time to read, to just look at one now and then. And again, you're going to find things that you love and things that you don't. And that's always been the paradox of Paul. In Galatians 1:27, he writes, Christ in you, the hope of glory. That phrase is what unity was built on. That was one of Charles Fillmore's favorite lines. But then he also wrote, women should remain silent in the churches. They're not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. And that carries to this day in many churches. So you wonder, is it Jesus' vision that he follows or his own? I like to think that he runs both sides. Because the line from 1 Corinthians sounds just like it's out of Jesus' playbook. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It's not proud. It does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always preserves. Paul had to strike a balance between his ego and the mission. And whether we agree with it or not, he became such an influence in the Bible that we have today. And it's a small background on Paul's influence on the New Testament. Each letter has a purpose, and each one carries influence that is very much around today. His letters were combative to the other apostles. And again, his victory was sealed by Athanasius. And for that alone, he warrants taking a look at every now and then. And I thank you for allowing me to do this. And I'm going to step away as we do the meditation.
Pour yourself in me, pour yourself into my heart. Oh, wonderful Spirit, pour yourself in me, pour yourself into my heart. Oh, wonderful Spirit, pour your joy in me, pour your joy into my heart. Oh, wonderful Spirit, pour your joy in me, pour your joy into my heart. Oh, wonderful Spirit, pour your love in me, pour your love into my heart. Oh, wonderful Spirit, pour your love in me, pour your love into my heart. Oh, wonderful Spirit.
Thanks so much. The music tape is great. I also like the theme. We all have this certain blue thing going on. One of the things I want to do one day is just do a talk on Peter. Peter is actually my favorite, besides Jesus, my favorite character because he is most like us. And by having so many records destroyed, I wonder what we would have learned about him. But he's just a fascinating, strong, yet flawed person at the same time. He's very average, and he rises so far up by having the faith and belief. And it's just a great character. So today I'm going to do our meditation from The Power of Prayer, and that's a book that Frank made for us. And whoever doesn't have one, come see me. I have some copies on my file cabinet. And I turn to this often, not just for here, but I carry this with me and read it at home. And I don't know how you picked this collection, but you did a spot-on job. I'm going to ask each person to get comfortable. Take in a deep breath. And begin to find your comfortable, relaxed breathing pattern. And we come together knowing that there is one power, one presence in our life and in our universe. God the good, great, omnipresence. There is no greater comfort on earth than knowing I am safe and I am secure, no matter what is going on in the world around me. I achieve this state of mind in personal relationships with the higher spirit, higher spiritual power within me. It is developed through my times of daily prayer, meditation, and waiting in the silence to receive the answers that are right for me. As I pray for insight and understanding, I am comforted to know that neither the disturbing broadcasts of the media, my negative past experience, the opposing opinions of others, have the power to keep me from finding and experiencing peace of mind. I do not allow the naysayers of the world to cloud my mind with error thoughts and beliefs. I keep my mind stayed on the goodness that is in all situations and circumstances that is revealed. It's revealed to me through my prayers, and in that I am comforted. I'm going to invite you back. Just kind of let yourself back into the room. I'm going to invite Bonnie up as we do the prayer for people. At any given moment in our lives and around the world, there are people who are fighting battles that they have to be brave through. Some known, some are not known. And we keep them in mind: wholeness, health, strength, and abundance. I'm going to turn this over to Bonnie. She has something that she would like to say. Want me to get you the mic?
some of you know my daughter. Many of you know and met her, because once in a while she used to come to Unity. And today I ask you all, please keep me in your prayers. Her caregiver, significant other, who they met in high school and 30 years later met again, and has never left her side. Just a little bit about how this disease plays no favorites. My little girl was born in Landstuhl, Germany. At the beginning, they weren't sure if she would make it. Her lung collapsed, and I'm going to share about the power of prayer. On the 12th day, when we thought we could go to pick her up, I was crying and I was praying. I said, "You can't take my little girl. I can't take my little girl." I walked into that hospital and doctor met us, and he had a smile from cheek to cheek. He says, "I don't know what happened, but your little girl's lung who collapsed is as healthy as if never collapsed." And so we I remember, I think it was in the Bible, that our children are but loan to us. You know, and I remember reading that and say, "Oh, I hope I go before my kids. You know, I hope they're not talking about my kids." So anyway, so today I'm asking you, because my daughter, I have given her permission to go to transition. She doesn't have a quality of life. And she was employee of MIT for 23 years, highly classified. But this disease plays no favorites. Doesn't matter. And yesterday when I visited her, she's bedridden, diapered. It's not a quality of life. But boy, it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. So I gave her permission, prayed over her and our wonderful Tom, because he was not well, couldn't come there. However, 2 friends come to pray over and released her. And I thought at the time I released her too. And I didn't. But I said words to release her. And finally I did. I says, "Honey," I says, "it's time to go. God's waiting for you." Someone she knows, Sherman, is waiting for her. Many cousins, relatives. And at one time when I was sharing that with her, she said, free. She has something called Lewy body dementia, which is the hardest, because sometimes she's totally lucid. Sometimes she don't talk. She don't have a clue. So yesterday when we visited her, and her caregiver is just really tired and worn out, oftentimes she gets up, she's on the belligerent side, and he has to keep her sedated. And even the doctor said about 3 months ago, and we know that it's up to God when someone's going to make their transition. I know that. And yesterday, her significant other says he was waiting for me to give him permission to give her the final morphine. I couldn't do it yesterday. However, I will, next time we talk, I'm going to say, you know, even though my daughter been with her many, many years, you know, I tell him what a wonderful caretaker he's been by her side all the time. And I will just say what I'm going to, first I always pray. because left to my own devices, I really don't know what to say lots of times. And I'm going to say, the conversation we had the other day, I wasn't ready yesterday for him to do it in front of me. However, I hear you and I honor you, and I will give you permission to do what you're comfortable with. So I just ask you to keep him. His name's Sandy, and my daughter's Brenda, myself. Family, in your prayers. And again, I repeat, it's up to God. But she has no condition life. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for letting me share this. And just want to say, we just don't know. We just don't know. Only God knows. And what I have to hang on to is she will finally be in peace. There are many, many, many people waiting for her. She'd be happy, and I'll end with this. She did come to me in a dream one time, about a month ago or 2 months ago, and she says, Mom, I'm ready. She says, I'm ready to go. She says, I won't be sick anymore, and it'll be okay. So she gave me permission. So thank you again for your prayers, and I can't thank everyone enough from the bottom of my heart. They say more prayers feels better. Thank you.
Amen. Love you, Bonnie. Right now, we'll do the collection.
In the stillness of this moment, there is peace, there is peace. In the stillness of this moment, there is peace, peace, and I rest and trust and breathe and know. In the stillness of this moment, there is peace.
To do the prayer of tithes and offerings. I feel a little shallow doing this at this moment. I just want to again turn to Bonnie. And Bonnie, we love you, and we will all hold you and your daughter in our prayers. Divine love, as me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I have, and all that I receive. So it is. Amen. I'll close this out with a prayer of protection. The light of God surrounds me. The love of God enfolds me. The power of God watches over me. The presence of God watches over me. Wherever I am, God is, and all is well, and we are richly blessed. I want to thank you all and join us for the closing song.